Even as we accept more refugees, including Syrians, we do so only after subjecting them to rigorous screening and security checks. We also have to remember that many of these refugees are the victims of terrorism themselves. That's what they're fleeing. Slamming the door in their faces would be a betrayal of our values. Our nations can welcome refugees who are desperately seeking safety and ensure our own security. We can and must do both.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you back. Continuing with our special hour here on the terror attacks in Paris, we welcome in Professor Alan Dershowitz, professor at Harvard Law School, Newsmax contributor, and author of Abraham, the world's first, but certainly not the last, Jewish lawyer. Hello, Alan.
Hey, how are you?
All right, let's focus on this issue of Syrian refugees. The president plans to go ahead with welcoming them into this country. However, hour by hour, the list of states that says, no, we will not take them is growing. And I think if you put this to a vote, the American people overwhelmingly would say, we don't want them.
Well, there's a third alternative. The only alternatives are not let them be killed in Syria or drown on the sea, or bring them in as refugees and allow them to become permanent American citizens. There can be temporary refugee places. Jordan is now doing that. They're not accepting Syrians to live there forever, but they're giving them asylum. They're saying you can stay here until the fighting is over, and then you go back. We can do the same thing. Other countries in Europe can do the same thing. We don't have to accept either extreme. Full citizenship, we accept you in just because there's a war going on in Syria, or we're not going to do anything at all. If during the Holocaust, for example, Great Britain and the United States had opened the doors to Jews and said, you can come in temporarily, but you can't stay here forever, a lot of lives would have been saved. So I think we have to think of third alternatives rather than the extremes, because you're right, a lot of American citizens and certainly some governors won't accept simply allowing 65,000 or whatever refugees, and how difficult it will be to distinguish the refugees from those who wish us ill.
But am I hearing you right? You would let them into the country, but just for a limited amount of time. If there are terrorists that make their way in, they're not going to obey the laws. They're not going to stay where they're put in, wherever that might be. They're going to be a threat, just as big a threat in the short term as they would be in the long term.
Well, I'm not suggesting that they be necessarily allowed to come into the United States.
Oh, okay.
There are Middle East countries that can accept them. I mentioned Jordan,
yes.
The Emirates. You look at Saudi Arabia, it's all empty spaces. It's all empty areas. There are hardly any people, and there's an enormous landmass. So I don't understand why we couldn't have some of the countries in the Middle East accept people for asylum and keep them there temporarily. That's what Great Britain did with a limited number during the Second World War. I'm just suggesting a model that's different from the extremes of full citizenship, refugee status, or doing nothing at all. We can do something in the middle.
Yeah, I apologize. I thought you said that we should do what they were doing. I misunderstood. Now, let me ask you about this issue of the Palestinian Authority media, Al-Hayat, Al-Jadida, the official news organ of the West Bank government, saying that this was the Jews, this was Israel. They were up there on the balconies shooting at these people who were watching the concert.
Well, what's new? You know, the Jews poisoned the wells, the Jews controlled the banks, the Jews, everything wrong that happens in the world is attributable to the Jews. That's 2,000 years old. But the Palestinian Authority, which claims to be the moderate voice of Palestinians who want to make peace with Israel, and they have a totally controlled press. You can't say anything.
Right.
On the Palestinian Authority press without the approval of the leaders. You can't preach from the mosque without the approval of the leaders, and yet you see these kinds of absurd allegations that the Mossad was the ones who went after the people in France in revenge for France labeling goods from the West Bank and the settlement. So it's the kind of absurd statement that you wouldn't take seriously, except when you're asking Israel to make peace with the people who are making those kinds of statements.
We have a report today that the Pope said that the Paris attack is the start of World War III. And, of course, Marco Rubio and others have said this is a clash of civilizations. Are you in that camp?
Well, I think that 9/11 was the beginning of what will be a 20 or 30-year war, a very different war. I don't know if you call it World War III, but it's a very different kind of war, and it's a kind of war that requires different approaches to human rights and civil liberties. The general rules that apply when countries fight countries don't apply when you have asymmetrical warfare, when you have people coming in and killing civilians. And remember, many of the people who were killed in Paris were Muslims and Arabs as well. These folks are totally indiscriminate, and one reason we knew it was ISIS and not Al-Qaeda. Believe it or not, Al-Qaeda is a little bit more discriminating. They go after Jews, they go after people who mock them, like Charlie Hebdo, but ISIS goes after people without regard to who they are, what their ethnicity is, what their religion is.
Alan, thank you very much for your time, sir. We appreciate it. Coming up next, more of the show. Don't go away.